5 years ago, a large video essayist got into a whirlwind of controversy on YouTube. It surrounded a minute-long section in her video Opulence, where a man read out a benign quote. The words themselves were fairly uncontroversial, but the person who voiced it was very much not. Online spaces erupted with anger because she platformed the transsexual who helped read it. But why? Everyone said that he is a horrible person, but almost no one had concrete evidence besides a few tweets and bad opinions. To be honest, this video is not about that situation. It's not entirely about Buck Angel, who read the line. If you said it was about Rupert Raj, you'd be sort of right, but it's not. It's about how grifting hurts us all and what trans activism truly looks like. This video will be analyzing and critiquing two older trans male figures, Buck Angel and Rupert Raj, to illuminate my points on individual grifting versus community-based activism. I'll be splitting this analysis into 4 major sections: a broad overview, terminology, and legacy. Looking at both men side by side to show how their influence diverges. This analysis would not be possible without the Digital Transgender Archive. A link to this comprehensive website is at the top of the description. Also, I have a content warning for transphobia, transmedicalism, and references to systemic discrimination across the board. Viewer discretion is advised. As a side note, I am not a peer-reviewed journalist or academic. I'm a trans person reckoning with my community's elders, so this essay blends research, opinion, and personal reflection. Overview. Buck Angel. Buck Angel is a transsexual man that is widely known as a pivotal voice in the adult performing industry. While he was the only trans man to ever win Transsexual Performer of the Year at the AVN Award, it's also important to mention the many trans women who came before and after him. While I discuss this career of his in broad terms, I will not go into the specifics. My channel is very safe for work. Being a trailblazing performer is far from his only credential, though. Some accomplishments from his interview with Good Clean Love in 2013 include: he has also done some great work concerning media relations for trans adult performers, especially for trans men. Here are just some of the newspapers he was interviewed for that reason. However, if you look deeply, this work seems to slowly transform maliciously after 2013. More on that soon. Rupert Raj. Rupert Raj is a Polish East Indian trans pansexual activist. Transitioning in 1971 in Canada, his work focuses on intersectionality within his spaces from the viewpoint of a trans man. He heavily includes advocating for trans people of color stuck in the prison industrial complex and out of it. Since I simply cannot cover every job he's ever had, here is the long list on the screen. Other accomplishments include: he has continually fought for transgender rights in Canada, especially those who have been imprisoned and are forced to detransition. So, at the start, why am I stressing their credentials rather than focusing on their personal lives? It's to have a baseline of what their work is in the trans community and what it looks like. Rupert Raj has been spending decades in the field working for intersectionality for all of us, and I cannot deny that Buck Angel has done good work. I want to recognize that upfront because it's genuinely important context. However, this is not the end of their legacies. It's just the start. Both men are of similar ages, yet their journeys have been entirely different. While Raj continually progressed and made up for his past mistakes, Angel has been an incredibly inconsistent bigot. Before we go deeper, I'll be completely transparent. I'm biased in this conversation. I'm biased towards Rupert Raj because we have aligned goals and values. He has made an incredible impact, and I genuinely admire him for that. While he is not a perfect man, he is undeniably a net good upon the trans community. On the other hand, I really dislike Buck Angel for many reasons. But I also want to say being a porn star and advocating for that career and the safety of it isn't one. In fact, I think that's one of the more admirable traits he has. Sex work is valid, real, and should be protected across the board, so do not get it twisted. I'm comparing and contrasting these two men because I want to make a larger point about trans activism versus trans grifting. When I say grifting, I mean misusing trans identity for personal gain in ways that harm others in the community. I don't know of any interaction Buck or Rupert ever had, so I can't tell you if they dislike or like each other. Frankly, it's irrelevant. This is my interpretation of their politics and legacy. And by the way, I have not had any correspondence with either of them. For each aspect of the trans experience, I will be explaining both of their opinions while I insert my own perspective into the conversation. Please remember that there is no one true trans experience. These are three people who have very different opinions, and that none of us speak for all of the trans community. Now that we have a general idea of who they are, we can better understand how each define and attempt to redefine transness itself. Trans and transsexual. Rupert Raj has done an unlimited amount of work explaining and advocating for the trans identity throughout the years. At the start, his opinion was fairly outdated, with gender roles ingrained in his upbringing and environment. In the first issue of his magazine for trans men, Metamorphosis, he says that transsexuals always find a core gender identity from age 1 to 3, adding that we are universally always tomboys from childhood. I resist his old opinions because I believe they came from a time that had little to no trans scientific research and community-based learning. However, I really admire that this opinion changed drastically the more time passed. These two poems he wrote in a treasury of transsexual, transgenderist, and transvestic verse from 1967 to 1991, while around the same time period, they show a more accurate personal depiction of his experience. It shows that his gender is more complicated than a strictly dysphoric life, even back then. The Man Within 2, page 138. I feel something stirring hidden inside this womanish shell. It's always reoccurring, the man within. I sense something burning, here inside this female hell. It's forever churning, the male within. I think something's drowning, deep down inside this lonely well. It's finally sounding, the man within. I know something's surging just inside this Venus's cell. It's Adonis emerging. The male within breaks out. Gender Euphoria 1, page 137. Once imprisoned, now I'm free. For a girl I used to be, till that glorious saving day, when my gender blues blew away. As I turned myself inside out and let my masculine self shout of this human persona, comprising animus and anima. I am the ruling force here. the dominant sphere. In short, I am the core identity, the male self in this human entity. Thus, my transsexual trauma, that uninvited dilemma, that cruelest conundrum, is now resolved, as I've become the male I always was. Indeed, the man I was meant to be. I don't think it's a coincidence that these two poems are almost back to back. It feels like two parts of his story. While the notion that trans people are stuck in the wrong body may be outdated, it was so real to him. His feelings were real. As I will explain later in the video, Raj has done extensive work with imprisoned trans people, and so the cell metaphor can be interpreted as literal. Our identity is more than heartbreak. It's more than a cage. It can be freedom too. Digging into his later biography from 2020, I noted that he did have a more scientifically accurate definition of the trans identity. On page 384, transsexuals, trans people, experience a gender identity inconsistent with their birth-assigned sex and desire to, quote-unquote, transition to their identified gender, usually seeking medical assistance, cross-sex hormone therapy, and/or gender-confirming surgeries to align their bodies with their identified gender. A medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria can be made if one experiences distress, discomfort, dissonance, or impaired functioning due to one's cross-gender identity, and a wish to live in society as one's self-identified gender. Transsexualism is a subset of an umbrella category of transgenderism, gender dissonance expressed by cross-dressers, formerly transvestites, transsexuals, and transgenderists, as well as people who identify as genderqueer, formerly androgynes, now gender non-binary, intersex, as well as people who identify as genderqueer, formerly androgynes, now gender non-binary, intersex, formerly hermaphroditic, hijra or indigenous two-spirit. Additional terms include gender variant, gender diverse, and gender transgressive, mainly for adults, and gender nonconforming, gender independent, and gender creative, mainly for children and adolescents. Some transsexuals and a number of non-binary, intersex, hijra, and two-spirit people reject transgender as a self-descriptor. Quote, he uses language like usually and generally a lot in this, which it balances the needs of many trans people who have certain needs, like surgery, but some who don't. He really recognizes the diversity that being trans is. It's a far cry from the very binary perspective he had decades ago. As a side note, gender creative is wonderful and very cute. It's a good term in my opinion because it lets questioning kids who may or may not be trans explore their own minds without seriousness and the baggage that comes with societally identifying as trans. I do appreciate that there can be language for all types of gender questioning people of all ages. Later, he also explains that non-binary people exist outside of the concept of gender too, along with religious and cultural identities such as hijras and two-spirit people. Raj has had a continually developing ideology on the trans community, expanding from just binary trans men and women to many more identities and experiences. Buck Angel. Buck Angel has not done that. In fact, his opinions on the transgender identity, plotted out on a timeline, is so wildly contrarian it makes my head spin. When asked about trans-affirming surgery fundraising in 2007, He told The Village Voice that, "That's my hugest pet peeve. You want to act like a man? You want to be a man? Act like a man. Men take care of themselves. Very rarely do they fucking beg for money. Get a fucking job and save your money like a man. Asking for a handout for surgery, it really bothers me. It's just wrong." Okay. This quote balances being classist and sexist with ease. I put it first in his long history of statements, not only because it's from 2007, aka closer to when he first started transitioning, but also because it reveals a binary, toxic definition of being trans. Trans people, even ones I respect, continually posit that Buck has regressed from a shining example of trans activism in the 2000s to a shitty person now. That is not true. Buck has always urged trans people to act and perform cisgender roles. He sees being trans and needing help from your community as disgraceful when other people do it. More on that later. The definition that he's blatantly screaming at us is that trans men need to act like real men in order to truly be themselves. He also tries to draw hard lines between what a transsexual is versus what a transgender person is. In 2018, he tweeted, of course it was on Twitter, "A hashtag transsexual is different than a hashtag transgender person. I am a transsexual. I had a hashtag sex change. I live in the binary and use testosterone and surgery to masculinize my body. I am a male, not hashtag trans. That's the difference." In the comments, he repeatedly states that it's his experience that he's speaking on. But he's also making broad assumptions about transgender people through that. Trans people, such as me, use hormones and have had gender-affirming surgeries. Yes, Buck can absolutely call himself a transsexual. Nobody's arguing with him there. But trying to dictate what being a transgender person is, especially when you self-admittedly aren't one, is very dangerous. His shifting definitions and attitudes of the trans identity appear to be performative rather than evolving. He's what I call a contrarian chameleon. He adapts his message not to reflect learning, solidarity, or even just evolving. He has absolutely no values except the ones that will get him money or clout. Over time, the pattern becomes clear. Buck's views shift not with experience, but with attention. In contrast, Rupert Raj's approach to the label of transgender is varied and multidimensional, without excluding transsexual people. It strives to include, to an extent that some may worry it waters down the actual definition of being trans. I don't share that fear personally, but I understand that some trans people may want to limit that identity, even if I do think it's harmful. However, that limitation is a very slippery slope. Once a person starts putting hard lines and rules onto the trans label, it becomes less and less accessible to everyone. And in the end, it's only you who remain. Dysphoria and transmedicalism. Preface. Dysphoria is the distress that occurs when a person is seen as the wrong gender, socially and physically. This can cause a variety of issues in a trans person's life, both internally and externally. Boiled down, transmedicalism is the belief that dysphoria is necessary to be trans. To an outsider, this seems accurate. But looking into the details and actual lives of varied trans people, it falls apart. Transmedicalism doesn't protect trans people. It narrows our legitimacy down to pain and surgery, creating a hierarchy of realness that leaves many behind. Buck Angel. In 2023, Buck had a wildly contradicting view on trans bodies in the Unheard digital magazine. By the way, don't recommend looking up the Unheard magazine because it is very TERF-centric. Quote, "I am proud that I have reclaimed the words vagina and pussy for transgender men's use," says Buck. "And I am so grateful I don't have the bottom surgery. I celebrate my vagina and I don't feel any less male." By the way, if you can share this video, because I think I'm gonna get demonetized. However, Buck does not give this grace to other trans people. In a blog post via Broadview News, quote, "When it comes to gender dysphoria, talk therapy is more important than anything else." Unquote. I truly believe therapy is an important staple of mental health care and transition for many people. But Buck and I don't have the same definition. Now is a great time to sit down and explain what talk therapy is in Buck's eyes for transgender people. He means conversion therapy. How do I know this? Well, he said it, of course. In his diatribe against trans women in activism, he states that they, trans women, are behind the quote-unquote conversion therapy bans. Because AGP, we will get to that definition, don't worry, is a sexual orientation that likely can't be changed through talk therapy, unlike the homosexual subtype, which is best understood as a developmental stage for many LGBT people. Most children with this type of GD, gender dysphoria, resolve it as they become adult gay/lesbians. Only a tiny percentage don't, complicated by things such as homophobia. Developmental psychotherapy can help resolve that. When AGP males control the narrative, banning all psychotherapy for gender identity, they are denying those of us with the other types of GD options for appropriate treatment, leaving us with medicalization as the only legal option. From Gender Dysphoria Alliance Canada. So, first of all, this is off the script, but I cannot believe Buck Angel advocated for conversion therapy. The link is archived, but he still said it in 2021. Moving on. So Buck only sees true transsexuals as those who have dysphoria and fully medically transition, but actively says trans kids don't exist. Trans kids can socially transition, and puberty blockers have been proven to be safe. He sees his own need to transition as higher than one of our most vulnerable populations. By the way, the sources he links don't coincide with his point. It actually proves it false, or it's just irrelevant. Here is a legal disclaimer that I need to make for this next section. All of the information about Buck Angel's previous company, Transgasm, is alleged. These are my opinions alone, and should not be taken as undeniable fact. With that said, from an article in 2013 by The Advocate, quote, "Buck Angel and Jody Rose, both transgender men, launched Transgasm as a platform where transgender men and women interested in receiving surgical care would have the opportunity to list themselves on a quote-unquote surgery list, 7 at a time. Funding for those on the quote-unquote surgery list would be generated from the sale of user-generated content on Transgasm's online store. The users who create a piece of content would be entitled to 50% of the profits brought in, while 25% would go to users on the surgery list, and the 25% would go back into transgasm. The pay-it-forward model is frequently used in pyramid schemes, making many online critics suspicious of this project. Unquote. So, Buck not only loudly proclaims how talk therapy fixes most dysphoria in children, but he also allegedly ripped away trans people's desperate money for his own gain while shit-talking them years prior. He uses his own knowledge of dysphoria to target other trans people. However, there are people who combat this narrative in tangible ways. Rupert Raj. Rather than go down a list of countless counseling group leadership, therapy work, and nonprofit leadership that Rupert has worked through, let's look at a particular occupation and time. Specifically, his work with trans prisoners who needed medical treatment. Rupert Raj's work in the prison industrial complex with trans inmates is all at once heartwarming and very sad. Many of these people's incarceration was directly or indirectly as a result of their trans identity. Dysphoria and desperation for transition can make someone with no resources take drastic action. This is not all trans people. These are just specific situations and they deserve our empathy. I urge my audience to be empathetic to people in the prison system. As one inmate said, my plea to other TSs, transsexuals, in the free community is to please support your brothers and sisters behind bars. They need your loving fellowship, not your condemnation, and have already been judged and punished by the courts. That quote could have been left to rot in a forgotten letter, but Raj answered it. His activism isn't just academic, it's responsive. It's driven by people asking for help and someone actually listening. He conversed time and time again with prison administration to get trans inmates their medical needs met. From Rupert Raj. It is my sincere belief that the immediate reinstatement of proper hormonal treatment for this person, whom I also deem to be transsexual, would be of considerable psychologic benefit to her, resulting in a more positive attitude and a more controlled behavior, which, in turn, would bring about a more harmonious environment within the confines of the prison itself. In this fashion, everyone wins, and the smooth running of the penal facility is ensured. To employ an old adage, smile and the whole world smiles with you. Cry and the whole world cries with you. Over and over in documented letters, he would struggle against these establishments and do his best to help them, even when he could have just walked away. As you'll notice, this isn't just a clash of opinions. It's a clash of values. Community care versus individualistic clout chasing. A main target of Buck's transphobia is aimed at trans women. The depths he goes to demean them is genuinely a bottomless pit. In 2021, he labeled most of the people at the forefront of trans activism were heterosexual males with AGP. What is AGP, or autogynephilia, you ask? In his words, AGP, which only inflicts heterosexual men, it is a paraphilia in which heterosexual orientation is inverted in such a way that the object of sexual desire is oneself as female. Autogynephilia is the notion that a male experiences sexual arousal from being seen as a woman, and they call themselves a trans woman. So this is horrible. Julia Serrano breaks down why this theory is inherently harmful in her Media article titled Autogynephilia and Anti-Transgender Activism. 1. The theory paints the majority of trans women as heterosexual men, thereby enabling misgendering, plus providing justification for some efforts by some trans-exclusionary LGB splinter groups to sever ties with the trans community, based on the premise that trans people are predominantly straight. 2. The specter of heterosexual men with a sexual fetish/paraphilia plays into anti-trans campaigns that attempt to conflate trans women with predators, and which claim that trans-inclusive policies represent a potential threat to women and children, despite all evidence to the contrary. 3. Because autogynephilia theory, or certain renditions of it, caricature trans women as being perpetually aroused by wearing women's clothing, some anti-trans activists have likened being in the mere presence of a trans woman, such as a coworker, to being non-consensually roped into that person's presumed sexual endeavors. This, of course, reinforces the aforementioned sexual predator trope. 4. Some anti-trans activists have used autogynephilia theory to discourage gender-affirmative approaches for assigned male at birth, AMAB, adolescents, and teenagers under the presumption that they must be nearly autogynephilic rather than authentically transgender. 5. Other anti-trans activists claim that gender-affirmative approaches to gender-diverse children are being promoted to serve the political interests of autogynephilic males. In short, Buck has consistently spit on trans women in order to gain ground in cis spaces. Burnout. Both of these men have experienced burnout with the trans community, but I'm going to focus on Rupert Raj because I don't care what Buck Angel feels. Rupert Raj's exhaustion comes from years of emotional and psychological labor. In 1990, he writes an open letter to the trans community, which is pretty scathing, not gonna lie. It is high time that I make the final permanent break with this fringe community, the paraculture, and let myself, at long last, mainstream into largest society like regular folk. After all, I am not gay, but straight, and I consider myself a man, not a transsexual. To put it bluntly, this sounds exactly like Buck Angel. Buck has gone on the record multiple times distancing himself from other transsexuals, and this is a rare instance where they are in agreement. Context, however, is everything. I'm tired of giving. I want my turn to take a little too, and to partake in the finer things of life. I'm also tired of gender working, and of being so serious all the time. I need to play a little too, and have some fun, like everyone else. Raj's big mistake was not that he didn't care, or wasn't community-centered enough. It was that he barely took time to relax for himself. It's what inevitably happens when a man takes decades of activism at a breakneck pace, only to turn on his community because he burnt out on them. He later returned to activism and retracted this letter, but it was still true to him at the time. Speaking now to my audience, it's so important to relax as an individual aside from working for your community. Yes, the work needs to be done, but you cannot run on an empty tank for decades. So, before this video, I assumed Buck Angel was a problematic figure who used to have some amount of glory in the trans community. The ContraPoints fiasco made me confused because it was a small and uncontroversial line, but I brushed it off at the time. Shitty people online are a dime a dozen, and even trans men get caught up in the toxicity. When brainstorming for this video, I was hesitant to even bring him up. Why go after a malicious person who won't change? What is the point of harping on someone that fundamentally will not care? That is, until the middle of researching. I found the New York Post article from November 2024, and all of that apprehension was thrown to the wolves. There's a lot of bullshit in here for sure. However, one particular sentiment encompasses my grievances with him. Quote, if it's a woman who's calling herself he, they just want brownie points. They just want to be part of this new thing, Angel said. You're never going to transition, so why should I give you the respect of calling you he when I put in all this effort? First of all, it's it and then it's they. Do you respect the people or not? Oh my god, I hate this man so much. Buck Angel, self-appointed trans grandpa, took the immediate period after Trump's winning election to sufficiently trample on the trans people under him on the systemic ladder. I just sat with that for a bit. I sat on the knowledge that people like Buck have an incredibly easy time climbing this patriarchal system for profit and clout. That the cisgender society we all reside in will inevitably choose someone damaging for their news coverage rather than pursue a more balanced, positive narrative. Buck Angel's legacy should not only be that he was a trans sex worker. Instead, he should be seen as genuinely one of the worst voices for our community I have seen so far. While Raj's work occurred largely behind the scenes or in nonprofit/clinical spaces, Buck's visibility came from a system that rewards controversy and conformity to cis-normative ideals. This disparity in platform is part of why so many people still see Buck as representative of trans men, despite him actively harming his own community. This video is not for him. It's for me and other people who actually care. My peers who want to learn from his purposeful mistakes. Buck isn't a leader in the trans community. He's a guide on what grifting truly is. We don't get to choose our elders, but we do get to choose who we follow, who we cite, who we remember with admiration, and who we remember as a warning. Rupert is a complicated man with an incredible legacy. Initially, I found a handsome photo of him on the Digital Transgender Archive, and I was sucked into his story from there. If I were to encapsulate Rupert Raj's legacy in 2 words, it would be labor and learning. Not only the inherent work that goes into active learning, but also the labor that a doctor provides to a patient. The work that a peer gives to a grieving friend. The vastly unpaid voluntary work that goes into activism. That's what Rupert's legacy is, but it shouldn't be the end. He is all of those things, but he's also a person, one that makes mistakes and needs to recuperate. He's a reminder to all of us that to do this needed work, we need to rest after. Raj shows us that real activism is slow, imperfect, and full of care. Buck shows us what happens when you trade that care for self-branding. I'm going to end with a quote by a trans inmate who wrote in a collection of writings with her peers published by Rupert Raj. Recently, this expert, a well-known clergyman and counselor, brought 2 transsexuals, a male to female and a female to male, to our prison to discuss transsexualism at a meeting, in the mental hygiene unit. That kind of thing gives me hope. There are people who care. Unquote. Be the one who cares. Thanks for watching. This was long. I really appreciate all the patience and all the wait. And what does real activism look like in your community? Who do you listen to and who do you platform? I really would love to hear it.